One important thing to keep in mind when we're creating our character is that all of our designing is done in frame 0 of our timeline. Anything past frame 0 is used for animating. Anytime that we're designing or editing a character, we need to be in frame 0. If you've accidentally bumped this playhead, you might notice that a bunch of tools are missing in the left-hand side panel. If that's the case, just check your timeline and make sure that you're in frame 0 to begin editing and designing your character. We'll move to frame 1 and all of the other frames within the timeline only when we're animating our character's positions. Let's learn how to bring a PSD file into MOHO Pro 13. The original PSD file I've created is separated into layers. A layer for the head, the body, the legs, and the tail. When we bring this file into MOHO, we'll be able to add bones on a separate layer, then attach the bones to the individual pieces of artwork that exist in the layers that we've created. Once we've created a rig for our character, we can select the different bones and drag them to place our character in a variety of different poses. This will also enable us to animate the character in a walk cycle or a run cycle. When I grab all of the various limbs by their endpoints, all of the bones follow. This is called a hierarchy. So let's have a look at our PSD file. And your PSD file can be exported from any application that supports the PSD export. I've created this design in Adobe Fresco. In Adobe Fresco, I separated the design into different character parts. For this character, I've created both left and right ear layers, a separate head layer, a separate tail, a front and back leg, and a separate body. Now what I've also done is broken down the body into additional sections. I have the chest, the middle of the stomach, and the rear. For the limbs, I've separated the front legs into two parts, the paw and the upper leg. For the back leg, I've created separate files for the haunches, the upper portion of the leg, and the paw. This includes the hip, the back leg, and the thigh, as well as the paw. This just gives me more flexibility should I choose to create a more complex animation. With the tail, I've done the same. I've imagined that this tail will be fairly flexible. So I've created the top of the tail, middle of the tail, lower portion of the tail, and the tip of the tail. All of these are in separate layers, and all contained within one folder. Jumping back into MOHO, we'll create a new document. From the top of the menu bar, we'll select File, Import, General Import, or Command I on the keyboard. When I choose my PSD file and click Open, it's going to give me a few options. We'll click Individually. This option will bring our character in as it looks in our Photoshop document. separating all of the individual layers. The character might be a little larger than your window, so we're going to resize the character by clicking on the folder that contains all of the character parts, or layers. Select the folder with the name of our character. By selecting the character in the middle of the screen, I can resize the character by using the transformation box. Small icons that are located on each corner of the box that surrounds our character on screen. Once I've placed my character within the camera window of MOHO, I'm going to select something in the tool panel called Set Origin. Our origin is currently set just above the eyes, which is actually the middle of our file in our PSD file. So I'm going to move the origin to the middle of our character. That way when I select and resize my entire character, it will resize from the center. Now I'm going to duplicate this folder with our character elements in it. I'll right-click the folder and select Duplicate Layer. What this is going to do is give us a backup of our character. Not only a backup, but a reference point for when we need to replace and reestablish parts of our character's position. I'm going to make the original file folder invisible. Now I'll use the folder that we've duplicated as our bone rig layer. Right-click on that folder and select Convert to Bone. Everything within that folder will now be used for our bone hierarchy to control our puppet rig. Now instead of a folder icon, you'll see a bone icon. It's the same folder that contained all of our individual layers. It's just now enabled so that we can use it as a rig. So to start creating a bone structure, or rig for our character, we'll make sure our main layer with the bone on it is selected. And we'll type A on the keyboard to start creating our first bone. This is also Add Bone icon in the toolbar. We're going to start creating a bone structure by first defining a controlled bone. Once we've clicked the A key, or Add Bone, from the toolbar, we can select the point from where we want our bone to begin. This will be a control bone, so I'll position it somewhere underneath my character, so that it's not confusing with the other bones. It'll be much larger than the other bones as well, so choose the best place to locate your control bone. Click to start creating the bone, and drag to resize the bone. If you hold down the Shift key, it will constrain the angle of the bone by 90 and 45 degrees. We'll bring it straight down 90 degrees for this character, and this will be my character's controller. Now we're always going to start at the tail of our spine to begin creating the actual bone hierarchy for our character's rig. We'll start by clicking around the hips. So click to begin dragging the bone. Drag the bone out, and choose the area where you think the next bone will start rotating. This is going to represent our spine, so try and imagine it as a spine. I'll drag the next bone out to where I think the neck would start, and I'll click and drag again to create the bone for the neck. Now if I want a more flexible neck, I will create a few spinal column bones For this neck, I will have 2 bones. Since we're already up at the head area, we can start creating our head. Now that we've finished our spine, when I click and drag again, it will create another bone for my head. We'll click at the rotational point and drag out to the tip of the nose. Now we've created a bone path for every single bone within our spine and head. You'll note that every single time that we create a bone, each bone after that will be parented to the last bone. To show you what I mean, I'll grab the Z key or manipulate bones from the tool menu. When I grab the head bone, you'll see that my entire character and the structure that we've created moves based on that of the bone that I'm dragging. Now to start a new bone, we need to be able to tie it to one of our other bones. So for instance, my ears are going to be attached to the head. I will need to make sure that my head bone is selected so that my ears will automatically be parented to that bone. You can use the B key to select your bone. Then you will need to use the A key or the Add Bone tool from the Tools menu. And draw approximately where you believe that the ears would begin or rotate from. I'll draw this bone up to the top of the ear. I'll need to select the head bone again so that my next ear is parented to the head bone. I can hold down the Option key to select the head bone, and I'll still be in my Add Bone tool so that I can begin drawing the other ear bone without having to switch over. Click to begin at the rotational part of my ear and drag up to the tip of the ear. Now my ears are automatically connected to the head bone. Now we need to deselect all of the bones by hitting Escape on our keyboard. And we're going to start creating our leg bones. Our leg bones will attach to our hip. So we'll need to select the hip bone. Since we already have our tool Add Bone selected, we can select our hip bone by holding down the Option key. And when I begin drawing, I'll already be in an Add Bone mode. We'll click around the rotational axis of the hip bone and drag down to the next rotational axis of our leg. It's a good idea when you're creating your characters to indicate where these joints would turn within your original artwork. Now by clicking and dragging, another bone will be automatically created and parented to the previous bone drawn. I'll click to drag down to the next rotational point, and then click and drag to create another bone. So now we're going to start creating the bones for our front legs. We're creating the legs for the left side of my creature. We're looking at it from the left side. With my Add Bone tool selected, I can hold down the Option key and select the chest, and then begin dragging to create a bone for my front leg. I'm going to use 3 bones in this front leg. Start by clicking on the rotational axis of the top of the leg, drag down to create 2 more bones. Now these will be tied to the chest bone that I selected to start creating my bone hierarchy. Now to create the tail, I'm going to need to select the hip bone again. I want my tail to be tied or parented to the hip bone. I'll use the Option key, as we are already in our Add Bone tool, to select the hip bone and then begin dragging out a new bone by clicking the rotational axis I want to start the tail from. Command Z on your keyboard to do this as many times as you want to get the right rotational axis start point. We'll draw a small segment where I think the tail would start from, and click and drag the rest of the segments for your tail lengths, ending at each rotational point as the other bones had indicated. I want my tail to be quite flexible and be more like a spine, so I'll draw several bones within this hierarchy, aiming them towards the middle of the artwork. Now we're not quite done our bone structure yet. We still have the back legs to do, or our right side legs. Unfortunately, they're hidden behind our character. I've already drawn them separately in our PSD file and have them in separate layers. I'll need to move these layers out from behind the artwork that we see now. In order to do that, we can select the layer that contains the rear-facing legs, or the right side legs in my character's instance. I'll select the layer that contains the artwork that I want to move first. I'll then choose Transform Layer, or Z on the keyboard. A box will come around our artwork showing the outside dimensions of our artwork layer. I can just click on that layer and drag it directly over to another section of the screen so that I can see that layer, or the artwork a little bit better. I'm holding down the Shift key as I drag, so it constrains the position along the X-axis. That way, when I go to return the artwork to its original location, I will only have to move in one direction. Now we'll select the other artwork layer, in this case our right front leg, and drag that layer holding the Shift key down to a position just in front of the previous leg that we moved. Now we need to select our parent bone to start creating the bones for our new legs. Since our front leg will be the first one that we create, we'll select the chest bone and start adding bones at the rotational axis of our right front leg. I'll click where the rotation should be and drag down to the next rotation and create 2 more bones. Now for the rear leg, I want to select the hip bone. I can select the hip bone by holding down the Option key and clicking the hip bone, then clicking on the rotational axis I want to start my leg bone at. Same as the other leg, draw down the bones until you've created the bone structure for that leg. So with our bone selected and offset bone tool chosen, we can just click and drag the bone and artwork into the original position. I'm eyeballing it here, which you can do, but if you want to be more accurate, remember that we've created a backup of our character to use as a reference drawing. So I'll make my reference drawing visible again, the folder that contains our original artwork. I'll once again click on the folder that is our bone hierarchy, the folder that contains all of our new artwork and is created as our bone structure. Now when I drag that bone in offset bone mode, I can place it into the original position by using our reference layer as a guide. Select the other leg's bone and position it to match our reference layer. Now whenever we're editing our limbs, they will automatically shoot out to the location that we had dragged the artwork into previously so that we could create our bones. When we go to move our bones and develop our animation, the bones will snap back into the location that we had moved our bones into using the offset bone tool. This makes it very easy to edit our bones and our artwork from this stage onwards. Now you can test out the limbs by hitting Z on the keyboard or manipulate bones tool from the toolbar menu. And you'll see that the artwork is responding to the bones that we've laid down. You can also see that the artwork is stretching unnaturally. This is because we haven't paired our artwork with our bone structure. So a very simple way of pairing our bone structure to the artwork is choosing the B key, making sure that we're on our bones layer or have our bones layer selected, and then just dragging around the entire bone structure of the area that we want to pair our artwork to. So for instance, if I want my rear leg to be paired to the artwork, my rear leg bone structure, I will select our top hierarchy, the bone menu, select the B key, trace around our bones, and then select the layer that contains the artwork that I want to pair to those bones. If you have several layers within a folder in your character layer section, you can hold down the Shift key to select all of the layers. Once you have all the layers selected that contain the artwork for the bones that you want to pair it to, we can now go up to the main menu, click on Bone, and select Use Selected Bones for Flexi Binding. So that's the top level menu, Bone, drop down menu, Use Selected Bones for Flexi Binding. They'll turn a bright, thick red color, which tells us that our bones have now been paired to that artwork. Now we want to select additional bones to control other parts of our character. So we'll need to click on our bone folder, choose B on the keyboard, and drag around the bone structure you want to pair with your new artwork. In this case, it will be our front leg. To choose which layer we need to select it to, we can determine which one it is by just toggling the invisibility switch on the layer. So with our bones selected, we'll choose our artwork from the folder list on the right, choose Bone from the top level menu, and use Selected Bones for Flexi Binding. The bones will turn a bright red to tell us that the artwork is now paired to those bones. I'm going to continue doing this by selecting the top level bone layer, clicking the B key on the keyboard, selecting my bone hierarchy, choosing the artwork layers that are required for that bone hierarchy, using the Shift key, going to the top menu, choosing bone, and using bone for flexi binding. You can also select the bones individually. Continue to do this with the rest of your character's artwork, attaching it to the bone hierarchy. Once all of my bones have been selected and paired with my artwork, I'll hit the Z key on the keyboard to test them out. Clicking on each bone should now move my artwork independently of the others so that we don't see any further distortion, weird distortions. Now, because I've selected all the bones and just paired them to the artwork as is, I might get a little bit of stretching and rubberiness to my character, which we can fix later on if we wish to isolate those joints and pair them with the extra pieces of artwork that I've created for the character. But this does a fairly nice job right now for us to at least get an idea of how our character is going to animate and move pose to pose. Now you will note when you grab some of these bones that there's quite a bit of distortion happening, and that is probably a result to the bone strength attribute. Each of these bones has a certain degree of strength or influence over the artwork around it, and that is what that red area around the bone indicates. So I'm going to select my bone layer, the top level folder of my character artwork, and I'm going to select all of the bones, Command A on the keyboard. You can also choose Edit from the top menu, select all. With all of my bones selected, I'm going to change the strength of all of them simultaneously, so I'm not clicking on each individual bone. So I can now select bone strength, which is S on the keyboard, and by clicking and dragging my mouse, I can influence the strength that the bones have on the artwork. The larger the red diameter, the more influence it will have on the artwork around it. So we're going to shrink the strength of these bones right down to somewhere in the middle of the artwork. A little bit smaller than the artwork, I think. And then you can individually go to each bone later on and choose the strength for that bone. For instance, if I want the more artwork to be controlled by that bone for the head, I can click on the head bone, click S on the keyboard, and control the strength of that bone, or influence the strength of that bone by dragging out. For some reason it's not working. There we go. So I can click on the head bone, hit S on the keyboard, and by dragging the mouse, I can make that influential area larger around the bone. Now you can test your rig out by hitting Z on the keyboard and grabbing the ends of your bone structure. You'll also notice that now I can move these bones in all sorts of directions, twist them up and tie them into knots. This is not what we want. So we can also adjust the bone constraints. For instance, if I click on my head here with the Z tool selected, I can move that head right around like it's possessed. And I need to be able to control how far that bone will actually move. Well, that's something called bone constraints. So to make this simple, we're going to select all of our bones, make sure that our bone layer is selected. Command A to select all of our bones. We'll click B on the keyboard, which will allow us to select our bones and edit them. Up in the top left-hand corner, we'll see something called Bone Constraints. It's a drop-down menu. When you click on Bone Constraints, you can see something called Angle Constraints. Check that box. And what I like to do is set it to -30 and 30 to begin with. This is the degrees of rotation that our bone can have. Minimum and maximum left and right. Or up and down. We'll close that box. And now when I hit the Z key, our character will come back together again magically. We'll see that when we grab a bone in the hierarchy, the rotation stays within the 30-degree parameter. I can't move my bone any farther than what the bone will move based on those restrictions we've placed. You'll also be able to see we have a visual indicator here at what angle this bone can be moved. That works pretty well for every bone, except for the tail. I want a lot of flexibility in this tail. So I'm going to select the bone that I need to rotate further than that 30-degree restriction that I've placed on it. I'll hit the B key to edit the bone, and I'll change that angle constraint to -70 and 70 where it was originally at. You can play around with this and do whatever you need to do to make that work properly. That works pretty fine for me. I can loop that tail around a little bit, straighten it out. So I'm much happier with that. No need to get too caught up in the way that's moving right now. If it works pretty well, leave it at that, and we can make further adjustments later on. Now that our character's skeletal rigging is complete, we can start thinking about animation. And to really make our character believable, it's nice to have it sitting on a plane. Currently, we can take any of our limbs and move them around, including our body using our control. And this is perfect for just posing our character within a stationary setting. However, if we want our character to move up, bound around, or do anything a little more exciting than something basic in a posable situation, we'll establish a ground plane. To do this, we're going to create something called target bones. Now, a target bone is a bone that other bones will follow. It'll keep an eye on it, just like a target. Just like the bow and arrow or looking through sights. You're focusing on something, and that's what our bones will be doing when we set up a target. We'll make sure that all of our bones are deselected before creating a target, because we don't want to pair or link our target bones to any other part of our hierarchy. If we have a bone selected, any other bone that we create after that will be linked to that bone, and we don't want that. So let's start by just creating a regular bone. We'll click on our bone layer. We'll select A for add bone. And we're going to come down to the bottom of our character's feet. Just right at the base of the paw here. I'm going to click and draw out a bone. We'll hold down Shift to keep it constricted to that 90-degree angle. Now I'll make sure that all of my bones are deselected by hitting Escape on the keyboard. I'll move to the other leg. Click and draw down from the end of the leg, in this case paw. Now that I have my two target bones set up, I'll select them both, hitting B on the keyboard, holding down the Shift key, and clicking on the additional bone. We'll go up to the top left-hand corner, Bone Constraints drop-down menu, and we'll select something called Independent Angle. When I select Independent Angle, what that means is these two bones, or target bones, will remain independent from the rest of our structure. And we should name these two bones so we have something to target. I'll click on the bone just underneath the front paw, and I'll name this Target Front. I'll select the bone at the rear and name it Target. You can rename any bone in your hierarchy, or when you create a bone, you'll automatically be able to name it by going up to the top of your window, and in the input box beside Bone Constraints and Select Bone, you'll be able to rename your selected bone. Now with both of our target bones named, I'm also going to select the two paw bones at the bottom of my leg hierarchy and name them as well. So select the first one and name it Front Paw. And I might as well add an L on there to tell us that's on the left-hand side. Front Paw L. And I'll select the rear paw and call it Rear Paw L. Now with that bone selected, my rear paw, I can go up to Bone Constraints, drop-down menu, and choose the drop-down menu Target. You'll see the names of all of our bones in here, including our target front and target rear. I'm going to select target rear because that is the target that I want this bone to follow. I'll click on the other paw bone that I had named Front Paw L. I'll return to the target drop-down and select Target Front. You'll see a little indicator at the top to say that these are now targeting this bone. To test it out, we can hit the Close panel box. Hit Z on the keyboard and move our target bones around. Now you'll see immediately when we start moving the target bone around that our paws are following its direction. Like they're aiming at it. But they do not move vertically from their place. Now, if I grab the control bone for my entire character and I move that bone, those paws will follow and track the target bones from wherever my character is positioned on the stage. Now we have 4 legs for our character, so I'm going to continue on by creating 2 more target bones for the other legs. I should note that I will need to select my target bones and name them appropriately left, rear, and front rear as well, so that we know which target bone is which when we're creating our other bones. So I'll rename my front target bone target front L, and my left rear bone target rear L. I'll hit escape on the keyboard to make sure that no other bones are selected, and choose A to add a new bone. I'll draw these bones from the bottom of my other 2 legs. And these are the legs that we've placed aside so that we can edit them easier. I'll click near the front leg and drag straight down, holding down my shift key to create another target bone, and do the same with the rear. Make sure that my bones are deselected by hitting escape, clicking at the base of the rear leg, holding shift to constrain the angle. Select both bones. By choosing the B key and holding down the shift. Go up to bone constraints. Make sure these bones are at an independent angle. I'll select the bone, the first bone, the front one, and rename it target bone R for right. Pardon me, target bone front. Pardon me, target front right. We don't need to call it bone. Click on the other one and call it target rear R for right. Now I can select the bone just directly on top of the front target bone and name this one paw front R for right. Select the bone that's directly on top of the other target bone and name it rear paw right. And with that rear paw selected, I'll click the bone constraints drop down and choose the target rear right from the drop down menu. I'll click the other bone on top of the other target bone and choose target front right from the drop down menu. Now when I hit the Z key, you'll see that the other 2 legs are pointing at the 2 target bones that we have created because they are off to the side. In order to correct that, what I've done is use the offset bone tool. So by selecting my target bone and choosing offset bone, I can move that bone directly underneath the leg in the correct position that I want it to be in. Now when I hit the Z key to move my bones around, all of my artwork stays in place and my target bones are repositioned. At any point that I want to edit, all of my edits will take place in the original location. So now all of my movements with my character will be based on the location of those target bones. One more thing before we cap off this target bone tutorial is that our target bones do not need a strength. They are not influencing any artwork. So we can hit the B key, select all of our target bones, choose S on the keyboard for strength, and minimize that strength to 0 by clicking and dragging on the keyboard so that none of the red area around the bones exists. And that's it for basic character rigging setup in MOHO Pro 13. We're now ready to animate our character.